I never thought my own family would be the ones to betray me. If you've ever been stabbed in the back by the very people you trusted most, then maybe you'll understand the pain I went through. My name is Olivia Carter, and this is my story of betrayal, humiliation, and revenge. A story that begins on the saddest day of my life, the day I buried my father. My dad, William Carter, wasn't just my father. He was my mentor, my hero, and the only one who ever truly believed in me. Growing up, I wasn't the perfect child. My grades were average. I wasn't the star athlete like my brother Daniel, and I certainly didn't have the charm of my sister Sophia. But Dad always made me feel like I was enough. He encouraged me when no one else did. He'd tell me, "Olivia, one day you'll shine in your own way. Don't let anyone dim your light." When he passed away, a piece of me went with him. After the funeral, we gathered at his lawyer's office for the reading of his will. I wasn't expecting much. I figured Dad would divide his estate equally among the three of us: Daniel, Sophia, and me. That's what most parents do, right? Equal shares, fairness. But as I sat there in that cold office, surrounded by polished mahogany furniture, and the sound of the lawyer flipping through papers, my stomach twisted with unease. My siblings sat across from me, smug smiles plastered on their faces, like they already knew something I didn't. The lawyer began reading. Daniel received the house. Sophia received the investments and savings accounts. And me? I got nothing. Absolutely nothing. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to process the words. How could this be? My father, the one who always supported me, the one who promised me I'd shine, had left me with nothing. Daniel smirked at me, leaning back in his chair like he had just won some kind of game. Sophia crossed her arms, her diamond bracelet glinting under the light as she said coldly, "Well, Olivia, I guess Dad knew who really deserved his fortune." Their words cut deeper than any knife could. I wanted to scream, to fight, to demand answers, but I sat in silence, my heart pounding, my hands trembling in my lap. The lawyer avoided my eyes, quickly closing the folder and standing to leave. My siblings walked out together, whispering and laughing as if celebrating some grand victory. I was left alone, abandoned, betrayed, and humiliated. But as I sat there, staring at the empty chair where my father should have been, something inside me shifted. The grief that had weighed me down all week began to twist into something else, something sharper. I realized that this wasn't just about money. No, this was about power, about respect, and my siblings had stolen both from me. And in that moment, I made myself a promise. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. But one day, I would rise. And when I did, Daniel and Sophia would regret every smug laugh, every cruel word, and every moment they made me feel worthless. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. Walking out of that lawyer's office felt like stepping into another world. The sun was shining, people were laughing on the streets, cars honked in the distance. Life went on as if nothing had changed. But for me, everything had. Daniel and Sophia were waiting outside, leaning against Daniel's shiny new BMW, laughing as though they'd just come from a party. When they saw me, Daniel smirked and called out, "Don't take it too hard, Liv." Dad just knew who the real success stories were in the family, Sophia added with her signature sneer. Maybe if you hadn't spent your 20s jumping from one dead-end job to another, Dad would have thought differently. Their words stung, but worse than their cruelty was the look in their eyes. They didn't see me as their sister anymore. They saw me as a failure, an outsider, a loser. I wanted to shout at them, to remind them of the nights I stayed up helping Sophia study for exams, or the weekends I covered Daniel's chores so he could go out with his friends. But instead, I swallowed my pride and walked away. because deep down I knew arguing wouldn't change anything. That night, I sat in my small one-bedroom apartment, staring at the ceiling, tears blurring my vision. My father's words echoed in my head, "Don't let anyone dim your light." But right now, it felt like my light had been completely extinguished. The following weeks were brutal. I worked long shifts at a diner, serving coffee to businessmen who probably made more in a week than I did in a month. Every time I looked at their suits and shiny watches, I thought of Daniel and Sophia, living comfortably off Dad's fortune while I scraped by with nothing. I'll admit it. For a while, I gave in to despair. I avoided family gatherings, ignored Sophia's Instagram posts flaunting her new luxury vacations, and stopped answering Daniel's smug calls asking if I needed help paying rent. They didn't offer help out of kindness. It was mockery disguised as generosity. But one night, everything changed. I was working the late shift at the diner when a woman walked in. She was elegant, confident, dressed in a sleek navy suit that screamed success. She ordered a coffee, black, and sat at the counter. We started talking, and I learned her name was Evelyn Price, a self-made businesswoman who had built her own company from scratch. Something about her energy lit a fire in me. She wasn't born into wealth. She wasn't handed anything. She earned it. When she left, she handed me her business card. "You've got potential, Olivia," she said. "Don't waste it." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at that card until the sun came up, and for the first time since Dad's death, I felt a spark of hope. The very next day, I made a decision. I was done being the family failure, done being pitied, done being mocked. I enrolled in night classes, business management and finance. I worked the diner by day, studied by night, and barely slept. It was exhausting, and there were times I wanted to quit. But every time, I pictured Daniel's smug grin and Sophia's cold, dismissive tone. That was all the motivation I needed. Years passed. Slowly, things started to change. I landed an internship at a small firm, then worked my way up to a junior analyst position. I networked, learned, adapted, and refused to give up. While my siblings coasted on Dad's money, I was grinding every single day, building something real. And soon, my hard work paid off. I joined forces with Evelyn, who became both a mentor and a friend. Together, we launched a consulting business, helping struggling companies restructure and grow. At first, it was tough. Long nights, endless challenges, barely breaking even. But within a few years, our reputation soared. Clients lined up, contracts poured in, money started flowing. And for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. But with success came something else: clarity. I realized that my siblings, who thought they had won, hadn't actually achieved anything. Their wealth was borrowed, not earned. Their pride was empty. Meanwhile, I had built an empire with my own two hands. And yet, despite everything I achieved, a part of me still burned with anger. Because Daniel and Sophia hadn't just taken money from me. They had stolen my dignity, my confidence, and years of my life that I would never get back. And one thing became clear in my mind. It was time for them to pay. For years, I had told myself I was over it, that the best revenge was living well, building my own empire, proving I could succeed without anyone's help. And for a while, that worked. But then came the reunion. It had been nearly 5 years since the reading of the will. By then, my company with Evelyn was thriving. We had offices in 2 major cities, a team of 30 employees, and a client list that included names my siblings would brag about knowing socially. When I arrived at the family gathering, hosted at Daniel's sprawling mansion, it was supposed to be just that: family. But Daniel and Sophia couldn't resist turning it into a showcase of wealth. Expensive cars lined the driveway. The champagne flowed endlessly, and every conversation was about vacations, jewelry, or which luxury resort they were flying to next. The moment I walked in, I felt their eyes on me. Daniel gave me a once-over and smirked. "Well, well, Olivia, still driving that little sedan of yours? You know, if you ever need help, Sophia and I could always chip in for something more respectable." Sophia laughed, sipping her wine. "It's sweet that you still try, though. Really, it is." Their friends chuckled politely, but I could tell they were watching me, waiting for me to crumble under the humiliation. For a split second, I almost did. Old wounds cut deep, and their words reopened every scar. But then something shifted. I realized they didn't know. They had no idea who I'd become. No idea that the woman standing before them was no longer the desperate, penniless sister they once mocked. They still thought of me as the failure, the forgotten child. And that ignorance, that arrogance, gave me the opening I needed. That night, lying awake in the guest room of Daniel's mansion, I made a silent vow. They took everything from me once. Now I would take everything from them. Revenge isn't something you rush. It's like chess. Every move must be calculated, every piece positioned just right. The first thing I did was gather information. I hired discreet investigators, the kind who could dig up details that never made it into the public eye. And what I found was delicious. Daniel, the self-proclaimed financial genius, wasn't as smart as he pretended. He had invested heavily in risky ventures, luxury developments overseas, crypto schemes, even a failed attempt to open his own private club. On paper, he still looked wealthy, but in reality, he was bleeding money. Sophia wasn't much better. She had married a wealthy man, but her spending habits were outrageous. Designer clothes, constant travel, impulsive purchases. She was burning through her inheritance faster than anyone realized. The cracks were there. They just needed a little widening. Through Evelyn's connections, I was able to get close to a few of Daniel's business partners. I didn't reveal who I was right away. I simply positioned myself as a consultant, someone who could offer them better opportunities. Slowly, I began pulling deals out from under Daniel, redirecting them into my own company. As for Sophia, I knew her weakness, status. She lived for appearances, for being seen as the most glamorous, most admired woman in any room. So I started showing up at the same events, not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. A tailored suit here, a sleek car there, a whispered introduction to people she desperately wanted to impress. It drove her insane. She tried to belittle me, but the more she did, the more others saw her insecurity. And slowly, her spotlight dimmed, while mine grew brighter. Revenge isn't just about making your enemies suffer. It's about timing, waiting until they are at their most comfortable, their most secure, and then pulling the rug out from under them. That opportunity came in the form of a massive real estate deal Daniel was chasing. If it succeeded, it would restore his finances, elevate his status, and make him untouchable. He bragged about it constantly, telling everyone how it would change the game. What he didn't know was that the very investors backing the deal were already in talks with me. Evelyn and I had spent months building trust, offering them safer, smarter opportunities. By the time Daniel was ready to sign, they were already gone. The deal collapsed. His reputation took a hit, and whispers began to spread in his circle. Maybe Daniel wasn't the genius he claimed to be. Meanwhile, Sophia was preparing to launch a luxury fashion boutique, her big project to prove she could stand on her own. She had poured money into it, hired designers, thrown lavish launch parties before the doors even opened. But through quiet, strategic influence, I made sure the boutique's suppliers pulled out. Her store shelves stood empty on opening day. Guests left unimpressed. Investors backed out. The humiliation was public, devastating. And I stayed silent, watching from the shadows as their perfect lives began to crumble. For months, I played my role carefully, supportive sister in public, ruthless strategist in private. Each time they stumbled, I offered a smile, a kind word, even a sympathetic hug, while knowing I was the reason they fell. And the best part? They still didn't suspect me. To them, I was just lucky Olivia, finally catching a few breaks. But deep inside, I knew the truth. Every loss they suffered, every sleepless night they endured, every ounce of pride stripped from their faces. All of it was my doing. And I wasn't finished yet. Because revenge isn't just about watching them fail. It's about making sure they never, ever forget the person they once called a failure. And soon, they would learn my name all over again. I planned the night down to the second, not because I craved theatrical cruelty, though I won't pretend I didn't relish the thought, but because spectacle is a tool. People believe what they see. Naked facts in a public room with witnesses leave no place for their lies to hide. The event was the city's annual charity gala. Daniel and Sophia had been on every committee for months, handing out invitations, smiling for photos, and padding their social calendars with people who might mention them in the right circles. They thought the gala was going to be their coronation. Handshakes, applause, influence secured. I bought a table, not the cheap one near the coat check, but a table at the front, a subtle announcement. I arrived in a sequin navy dress, hair loose, face soft, but eyes sharp. I walked across that ballroom and felt something I hadn't felt since Dad's funeral. Not anger exactly, but a cold, steady power. I knew the room, I knew the players, and I knew the dossier sitting quietly on the USB drive in my clutch. Evelyn was at my side, calm and impossibly composed, the rock I'd needed. A few of my key clients were there too, casual and unsuspecting, smiles tucked behind their glasses. I had people in place, allies who would back me when the moment demanded it. Daniel and Sophia arrived in their practiced way, a perfect entrance, a kiss for the cameras, a laugh at a carefully timed joke. The crowd loved them. For now, when the host finished her opening remarks, a hush fell as she announced a surprise keynote. "Please welcome," she said, "someone many of you know and respect, Olivia Carter." I stood up. The room turned, a few heads tilted with polite curiosity. The forgotten sister stepping into the light. I smiled and walked to the podium. I spoke slowly, because slow lets each idea sink in. "Thank you. I know this isn't on the schedule, but tonight I need to talk about something important: honesty in business and integrity in family." I watched their faces. Daniel's smile thinned. Sophia's hand went to her clutch. The cameras found me like they always find a new scandal. I didn't start with accusations. I started with context. I spoke about Dad, not as a prop for drama, but as the moral center who taught me to earn rather than take. I described the long nights, the classes, the small business risks. I built empathy. I built my credentials. When you take money from someone, the world tends to side with the person who looks like the loser. You have to make them see you as anything but. Then I pulled out the device. The ballroom screen lit up behind me. A clean timeline appeared. Dates, emails, document versions. I let the first slide breathe on the screen. It showed a version history of a contract Daniel had touted as his brilliant negotiation last year, except the metadata showed my username as the original author. I had the draft, the tracked changes, the early notes. Side by side, his press release on top, my drafts below. Murmurs rose. I let them. Next slide, wire transfers to shell companies. Not the amateur crypto splash Daniel ranted about. This was meticulous, red flag transfers that matched the spending on Sophia's boutique, the private club loans, the investment losses he'd used to explain cash shortages. I had the bank memos flagged by the investigators I'd hired, and a timeline showing how money flowed from the business accounts into entities tied to his ventures. Now the room was buzzing. Phones came out, faces went pale. I didn't shout. I read bits from emails, Hayes-style corporate prose. Only this was Daniel's firm, his partners. Please see attached for final review, treat as confidential. Attached, my analysis. Attached, the log of how he insisted on removing my name before presentations. I read the messages where Sophia's boutique supplier confirmed pulling out after an anonymous call. The same call I'd anonymously initiated with a document proving inconsistent finances and questionable credit checks. By the time I reached the slide that listed investor withdrawals and the audit request initiated by a board member I'd quietly alerted, the air smelled different, like a storm before the first drop. Daniel stood. "This is nonsense," he said, voice high, a note of panic creasing his cheeks. "Who gave you that information?" I looked at him slowly, like someone reading the last page of a book he believed he wrote. "People like you hide behind charm and speeches," I said. "They forget that every file has a history, every draft has a creator, and every transfer leaves a trail." At that, one of the gala's sponsors, a man who'd been quietly speaking to other board members for weeks, stood. He tapped his glass. "I've seen these files," he said, "and I've seen them before tonight. Legal counsel is already drafting questions." Sophia shrieked, suddenly loud, a sound that cut into the crowd. "This is a setup. She's lying. Dad would never." They looked to each other, grasping for the old script where we were a smiling, functioning family with a perfect narrative. But the script had been torn. People started asking questions. Someone from a business magazine approached the host with a tablet, showing the slides to a small circle. A reporter who'd been chatting about charities turned her phone toward the screen. The narrative was shifting in real time, and I was feeding it with proof, not rhetoric. Then the part I'd planned for months, the legal team. As the murmurs intensified, a woman in the crowd I'd arranged to be present, discreet but resolute. I watched Daniel's knees go weak. He tried to laugh it off like a joke and failed. He looked around, eyes wide, realizing that the room no longer hummed with adoration, but with suspicion. Security quietly intervened, not to arrest, but to separate. Daniel was asked to step aside. People clustered, whispering in urgent knots. My clients stood, surprised but supportive. They had been fed objective proof before the night, a quiet briefing that made them ready to react on site. Evelyn's phone buzzed. She nodded at me, barely perceptible. I left the podium while the crowd was in motion and walked directly toward my siblings. I didn't yell. I didn't shove. I simply placed the USB drive in Daniel's palm and said, "You always said I'd never prove it. Tonight's proof is just the start." ... The officers dispatched to the venue that evening were from corporate security and internal compliance. Within 48 hours, regulators had questions. Within a week, auditors had frozen accounts associated with Daniel's ventures. Media outlets that had once courted Daniel for interviews instead published pieces with headlines like "Financial Red Flags at the Carter Empire." Socialites who had posed with Sophia at brunch now took their pictures down. And the very thing that tasted like victory, the thing that would dismantle them, also came with consequences I had considered. Newsrooms love scandal. Regulators love clarity. But so do people who have been burned by any fallout. I had to be careful about collateral damage. That's why I'd worked with Evelyn and a few trusted legal allies to ensure the evidence was solid, to protect my company and the people who'd helped me. In the days after the gala, the world shifted. Daniel's lenders requested audits. Sophia's suppliers filed lawsuits for unpaid invoices and breach of contract when her investors withdrew support. Their social calendars evaporated. Invitations stopped arriving. If humiliation had a sound, it echoed in their empty hallways. Muffled telephone rings, unanswered messages, the soft click of a door closed on a whispered name. A week later, Daniel called me. I let it ring. He texted. I didn't reply. I wanted him to feel the emptiness that matched what he'd given me. But I also went to meetings. I rebuilt relationships. I stepped into rooms Daniel once thought were his. I didn't celebrate with glee. That felt hollow. Instead, I felt an odd, quiet satisfaction, like a wound finally set and starting to heal. The final indignity for them, the one that made friends look at them differently, was when their own board removed Daniel from his leadership roles pending investigations. His empire wasn't destroyed overnight, but it was fractured. The scaffolding that propped up his shows of competence had been dismantled with slow, deliberate hands. People ask me sometimes if I felt bad when Sophia's boutique shuttered and she asked me for help, tearing up and pleading in front of relatives. I felt nothing like the revenge story villains in movies. I felt a cold, efficient closure. I remembered the nights I'd slept on couches while they stayed in hotels. I remembered the messages, the smirks. I also remembered Dad's voice urging me not to be consumed by hatred. So when Sophia cried, I gave her a polite nod and walked away. When the dust settled, questions about forgiveness came like rain, inconsistent and unavoidable. The public had seen the fall, but only a few understood the years of quiet work that had led to it. To them, it looked like spectacle. To me, it felt like restoration. Because the real victory wasn't the broken parties or the stopped invitations. It was that my name no longer sounded like the punchline at their table. It was that when people said, Olivia Carter, they thought of a woman who had built something, not of the kid who'd once been overlooked. That night at home, I took Dad's old watch out of the drawer. He'd worn it for birthdays, for anniversaries, for the ordinary days when he showed up. I wound it and listened to the steady tick. Revenge had been cold, calculated, and at times lonely. But as the tick matched the steady beat of my heart, I understood something else. I had not destroyed a family for sport. I had reclaimed a life stolen from me. The house of cards they had built, it had collapsed. But my world stood up, steadier, if a little bruised. And I thought of one last thing. The people who had helped me. The diner customers I'd once served. The mentor who handed me a business card. The colleagues who entrusted me with their stories. This wasn't just about me. It was about fairness. It was about truth. When the last audit completed and the headlines cooled, what remained was a quieter world, but one where my name finally had the weight it should have had all along. When the dust finally began to settle, I found myself in a strange kind of silence. For years, my life had been defined by anger, quiet, simmering anger at the betrayal of my own blood. It had fueled every late night, every calculated move, every carefully stored file. And now, after the gala, after the audits, after the investigations that turned their empire upside down, the anger was gone. Not because what they did was forgiven, but because it had been answered. I remember the first morning after the story hit the news. I woke up, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was fighting shadows. The phone wasn't buzzing with dismissive messages. I wasn't checking my bank account every 5 minutes, worried if I could keep the lights on. I wasn't wondering how long I'd have to carry my father's legacy alone. Instead, I poured myself coffee and stared out the window as the city slowly came alive. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. Of course, Daniel and Sophia weren't gone. Their names still popped up in the papers. Pending investigation. Allegations of fraud. Questionable accounting practices. Their friends had scattered like rats when the ship sank. Even their closest allies distanced themselves, worried that the taint of scandal might stick. And every once in a while, I'd get a message, sometimes from Daniel, begging for a meeting, insisting I'd gone too far, sometimes from Sophia, her words dripping with both venom and desperation. Do you know what you've done to this family? Family. That word still made me pause. They had used it like a weapon, a way to control me, a way to make me feel guilty. But I had learned something powerful. Blood may tie you together, but loyalty makes you family. My real family were the people who stood by me when I had nothing. Evelyn, who never stopped believing. My colleagues, who respected my work when no one else did. The friends who quietly encouraged me to keep going. And my father, even though he wasn't here to see it. One night, after another long day of rebuilding contracts and signing new clients, I pulled out his old leather journal. He used to jot down little pieces of advice in it, scraps of wisdom from his own hard years. On the inside cover, in fading ink, was a line I hadn't noticed before. Truth always walks slower than lies, but it always gets to the finish line first. I smiled, because he was right. It had taken me years, but the truth had crossed the finish line. The hardest part, though, wasn't bringing them down. It was figuring out what to do after. See, revenge gives you purpose when you've been wronged. It becomes the thing you wake up for. But once you've achieved it, you're left staring at a void. Who are you without the fight? For a while, I wasn't sure. I'd built a career, yes. I'd proven myself, yes. But beyond that, what next? So I focused on building, not burning. I expanded my business carefully, not for flashy headlines or gala applause, but for stability. I hired young people who reminded me of myself, hungry, overlooked, underestimated. I mentored them, gave them chances no one had given me. And every time I saw one of them succeed, it felt like I was finally paying back the universe for what I had endured. Daniel and Sophia, their stories faded into scandal columns and bitter whispers. They tried to claw their way back, of course. Daniel even attempted a new venture under a shell company, but without trust, no investor touched him. Sophia floated around social circles like a ghost of who she used to be. They had built their kingdom on lies, and lies don't last. One evening, months later, I ran into Sophia at a cafe. She looked tired, older, her once perfect image cracked. She tried to meet my eyes, searching for something, sympathy maybe. But I only nodded politely and walked past. Here's the truth. Revenge doesn't mean staying stuck in the past. It means you finally get to move on. Now, when I tell this story, people ask me, was it worth it? The sleepless nights, the years of planning, the risk of stepping into that ballroom and setting off a bomb that would change everything. And my answer is simple. Yes. Because I didn't just get revenge. I got myself back. I'm no longer the forgotten daughter, the underestimated sister, the woman they tried to erase. I'm Olivia Carter, and my name carries weight, not because of them, but because of me. And every tick of my father's old watch on my wrist reminds me that the best revenge isn't just about destroying the ones who wronged you. It's about proving that you were stronger than they ever imagined. That night at the gala, Daniel thought he was watching his empire crumble. But in truth, what crumbled was the illusion, the facade he and Sophia had built. What rose from the ashes wasn't just a business or a reputation. It was me. And that, more than any headline or scandal, is the legacy I'll carry forward. So was it revenge? Absolutely. But more than that, it was justice. And sometimes justice takes years, tears, and every ounce of strength you have. But when it finally comes, it's worth every second.